Hello, today I'm going to show you how the Enemy Survivor mod was made for Red Falcon. This video will be a bit more on the technical side than the last one, so keep that in mind. There were actually several mods. As every single enemy needed to be able to be spawned in, I couldn't do them all in the same mod. However, instead of creating an entire mod for each individual enemy, I was able to group them by making custom power-ups for each player. The custom power-ups spawned in their respective enemy. This was done by going to the boot-up file and duplicating the player child actor param file. This is different than the player-base child actor param file because that one has Mario's render transformations and Prince Florin. In each duplicated file, you swap the bubble and fireball for different things, such as enemies for this pack. Repeating this over and over, I can spawn any enemy in any level. In the same file, I also had to reduce the amount of fireballs and bubbles that could spawn to 1. This was less so only one could spawn, and more so the game could actually spawn them. Wonder dislikes having too much data in the fireball or bubble slot, so setting the count to 1 lowers memory usage and allows more complex enemies to spawn. Lastly, I went into each individual player's child actor param file, which has their wonder transformations and ghosts, then I changed the parent to their respective newly duplicated file. Doing this, I was able to have 14 enemies per pack instead of just 1, as if I just put every enemy in every level, I would need more storage. Some enemies also had specific issues, but I'll just explain those at the end if you're interested. The players being invisible was to put more focus on the enemies. However, the player's invisibility was not caused by the invisibility badge. Instead, I went into each player's super model pack file and reduced their scale to 0, except for the toads who had to be turned into Daisy first because for some reason toads crash when you rescale their model. Secondly, badge flower, which is the object that is the Prince Florin on your head, had its model info changed to something that's not a real model. Those two alone hide the player, but not the particles or sounds. Sounds and particles are usually stored in the S-Link and E-Link components of an actor. However, for players, it's condensed into the X-Link. Removing them is as simple as changing the X-Link on each player files to something that doesn't have particles and sounds. I chose a zip track, which is velocity internally, and it worked pretty well. One more small adjustment I made to the player was where the projectiles spawned. I increased the distance so larger enemies, like Shoomps, wouldn't immediately interact with the player. After all that, the player is invisible and silent, so you can focus on the enemy. The last edit to the player was giving them Nabbit's damage reaction table, so they wouldn't die. It's the enemies who need to survive, not the players. I also included a mod I had created before where all levels are unlocked. This was done by going into each world map level file and removing the unlock requirements per level and per piranha plant. This allows you to access any level any time, and the seeds and wonder flowers will still show in color. The last part of this mod was similar to an every level is mod. I put power-ups at the start of every level and at every checkpoint so the enemies could be spawned at will. Although you could just bring power-ups into most levels, you can't bring them into badge challenges, and if you die in a pit you lose the power-up, so this was a good way to get around that. This was done using Python. You can decompress levels into YAML, which is essentially text, and Python can edit text really well. I copied the text for a fire flower and a bubble flower from one level, and then had Python make the required changes to put it into each individual level. Python had to account for a few things, such as what level it was editing and where in the level it would put the power-ups, but I had most of the code from the other every level XYZ mods, so it was pretty easy to make. With all that together, that's one pack made. The only difference between each pack was the enemies in each, so it was easier to create new ones after the initial setup of everything. I hope you enjoyed this explanation video. I have another one explaining how me and Arrowstotle upgraded enemies in Mario Wonder. If you like these videos, let me know in the comments. For those who stuck around, I'll explain some interesting things I ran into along the way, such as outlier enemies or just random fun facts. Initially, the player-based child actor param file from the boot-up file was going to be used. I was going to replace Prince Florin and the grappling vine with both power-ups. This proved tedious while in game, so I decided to use Python to do an every level is mod instead. A few actions still causes the players to make sound for some reason, mainly the spin jump and using a power-up. Likewise, the particle effect for colliding with an enemy still exists too. It's likely a common component on everything. Fushigi, the level editor, was used very little for this video, only to copy the data of a fire flower and bubble flower for Python, as well as the thumbnail, allowing for zooming and a blank green screen level. Now for enemies who gave me trouble. The reason Snoodles come from a launcher is because otherwise they only went left for some reason, no matter what direction the player was facing. Bullets had that issue too, but they usually come from launchers, so it makes sense. Some enemies like Lakitu have a lot of data because they also spawn something themselves. Like I did with the player's fireball and bubble count, I reduced Lakitu's spawn count too. Sadly, doing this didn't fix Bowser Jr.'s main form, which is why only the clone spawns. Big Bloomp only decides to spawn during Wonder events for some reason, so it wasn't included. Little Sparkies also always went the wrong direction, but I could change it internally in the file. This is probably because they're always hugging a wall, they have to move in a specific way. Lastly, Pokepete and Big Boo weren't included because they need tracks, otherwise they freak out or just don't spawn.